Hi everyone, thanks for attending SDCC at Home's Library Programming track. Today we'll be discussing comics as a conduit for change. Our first speaker today is Henry Barajas, a Latinx author from Tucson, Arizona. He has contributed to anthologies such as Where We Live and The Good Fight, books that benefit victims of the Route 91 mass shooting, and organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. Currently, Barajas is the Director of Operations at Top Cow Productions. His newest title is La Voz de M.A.Y.O, Tata Rambo, with artist Jay Gonzo. Next up, we have speaker Rodney Barnes, the award-winning writer and producer of HBO's Showtime, Hulu's Wu-Tang: An American Saga, Marvel's Runaways, Star's American Gods, and a host of other television programs and films. He has also authored graphic novels such as Star Wars Lando Double or Nothing, and his newest title is Killadelphia with artist Jason Sean Alexander. Following Rodney, we have Darcy Van Poelgeest, a multi-award-winning writer and director. His film work has been screened internationally at festivals, been broadcast on TV, shown in galleries, and become a bestseller on iTunes. His newest book is Little Bird, The Fight for Elders' Hope, with artist Ian Bertram. Last but not least, we have David F. Walker, a comic book writer and semi-retired college professor. He is the author of the graphic novel The Life of Frederick Douglass, and his newest title, Bitter Root, has a second volume coming out this September. My name is Chloe Ramos-Peterson. I'm speaking to you from Image Comics, and I'll be your moderator today. Please stay tuned for the end of the panel when we will offer resources and previews for all of the books we've discussed today. And now, without further ado, let's begin. Rodney, could you give us an elevator pitch of Killadelphia for those people living under a rock who might not have heard about it yet?
Yeah, Killadelphia is about a father and son detective team that are on the trail of a vampire serial killer in the guise of former President John Adams, who is a vampire and has descended upon Philadelphia in the name of making America great again. The quickest sales pitch I could give.
It's an excellent one and very distressing.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what we call high concept, right?
That's what we're looking for.
Doing my best.
Moving down the line, Darcy, can you give us your elevator pitch for Little Bird, which is coming out in trade paperback for the first time soon?
Yeah, Little Bird is the story of a young Canadian girl fighting in a resistance against a theocratic American empire. There you go. That's the short, sweet version.
Similarly high concept. David, did you want to go ahead and give us your elevator pitch for Bitter Root, or should we just look outside onto the streets right now?
Yeah, it's going on right now in America. So Bitter Root takes place against the backdrop of the Harlem Renaissance, 1924. It's about a family of monster hunters, and the monsters that they hunt are people who have been transformed by hate and racism into demonic creatures, and but now they're facing an all-new threat, which is people who become monsters through grief and trauma. And we're now in our second arc, and war has been unleashed on planet Earth.
That is definitely how it feels.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling working on it now. It's very, it's like, you want it to be like far from reality, and then yeah, it's kind of yucky.
Yeah, for sure. Henry, would you like to give us your elevator pitch for La Voz de M.A.Y.O for anyone who may not have become familiar with it?
Yes, thank you. La Voz de M.A.Y.O, Tata Rambo is about my great-grandfather, Ramon Jauregui. He was a World War II veteran, an orphan, and he led a protest to stop the city of Tucson from taking the Pascoyaqui tribe's land to build the Interstate 10 through their community, displacing thousands of people and tearing down homes and schools and a whole tribe of Native Americans, the Pascoyaqis, and it's my comics journalism look on what happened all those years ago and how it affects us today, and how important it is to fight for Native Americans at a time where they're constantly being just stamped out of their communities, left to their own devices when it comes to global pandemics. And I'm just glad that I was able to share his story and kind of shine a positive light on Native Americans and Mexican American migrants and Mexican American people.
Thank you so much. Actually, in both La Voz de M.A.Y.O and Little Bird, land dispossession and environmental issues, particularly among indigenous communities, present some of the central conflicts. And similarly, in Killadelphia and in Bitterroot, we see themes of disenfranchisement and violent dispossession through things like the Tulsa massacre and the slow motion disaster that was urban renewal, quote unquote. Can you discuss why these struggles were something that you all felt compelled to include in your narrative, and talk to us a bit about how readers might be able to use your book as a jumping off point to get involved in these problems? Rodney, did you want to take the wheel?
Well, my purpose, I hadn't seen many stories that dealt with class as it pertained to race. It was mostly a one-dimensional portrayal of race. And I wanted to go a little bit deeper. I wanted to get into the idea of how poverty plays a role, and displacement and apathy, and what happens when people feel powerless. I felt like through TV and film and trying to get those stories told, the gatekeepers really weren't interested in those types of stories. So comics for me was a good place to explore themes that felt like they hadn't been explored a lot. And I've come to find that they have been. I haven't been as much of a comics reader in the past 5-10 years as I was earlier on in life. But, I love the layered themes. I'm a big fan of Bitterroot. And, I just wanted to contribute another voice and idea into a lot of the problems that we have in society today.
Since you mentioned Bitterroot, David, did you have anything that you wanted to add to the discussion for this?
Sure. When I was a kid, I was probably about 13 or 14, I saw Night of the Living Dead for the first time, George Romero's first film, and it blew my mind, and I became converted to the Church of Romero. And but the thing that I loved about it was that, even at that point in my life, I'd seen a ton of monster movies and sci-fi movies, and I understood that a lot of them were metaphors for something else. But there was something about Night of the Living Dead that really resonated incredibly deeply with me. It was one of those, it's that movie that changes your life, right? And it was like, for the first time, if you watch something like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that's a metaphor about the communist threat. But Night of the Living Dead seemed like it was a metaphor for everything that I was dealing with as a young man growing up in America. And so ever since then, I've thought, well, if you're going to try to make a horror film or a horror story or a horror comic or whatever, it's got to be about something. And I think that ultimately for myself as a creator, I don't want to speak too much for Sanford and Chuck, but I will, because, I'm the one who's and but, it's like, well, what scares me? You know, what am I scared of? What's the thing that makes me not want to, you know, come out from under the covers? And it's this, and it's not, part of it for sure is this battle of racism, but then it's also it's like, well, whose responsibility is it to fix this problem? Whose responsibility is it to fight the monster? And so that's what Bitter Roots really, for me anyway, what it's about.
I think speaking to responsibility and sort of the burden that everyone is shouldered with in life, I wanted to also talk about how all of your books have an undercurrent of sort of PTSD and generational trauma and the things that your protagonists are faced with, how those things weigh on them in the long term, and not just them, but their families, how it affects them in the now and how it affects them moving forward. Darcy, in terms of Little Bird, there's a really beautiful allegory that you use with the story of the wolf. I was wondering if you could relay that to the audience in short form and talk to us about what that meant for you and why you included it in the story.
Oh, I have to see if I can remember back to my, I mean, it's sort of, that takes place in the first chapter, and Little Bird, who's 12, is sort of born into this war that's been going on for generations, this fight for their land, which was inspired, and I'm trying to figure out how to do this in a short way, but was inspired by a documentary I did working with some indigenous communities here on the West Coast in Canada. But one of the things I wanted to make clear was that she was born into this predicament, where intergenerational trauma was already at play, and that she was fighting for something good, but something that she was too young to fully understand. Mm-hmm. And so that particular section is about her sort of making that transition from a point in her youth where, and there's a lot in the book about the relationship between parents and children, some of which comes from my own experiences. But she sort of makes that transition from seeing your parents as these sort of bigger than life figures to realizing that her childhood is escaping her because of she's beginning to truly understand the depth of what's going on around, and she likens it to becoming a wolf. So she feels like she's her inner self is being transformed from whatever last little bit of innocence she might have maintained. She's now a creature that needs to hunt with purpose. And this in the book, she's being hunted by a wolf at the same time. And there's this sort of little fun twist there. But yeah, that's sort of.
Yeah. No, it's really beautifully done. And I think that it's something, it's a concept that will resonate with a lot of people who have, worked in the more dangerous professions, worked as firefighters, or been in the military, or even, been out to protest. There are certain things that happen to you, whether you're born into them or not, that change you. Henry, in terms of Tata Rambo, what was his experience as an activist, and was he changed by it? How did his work affect his family and affect him? And then how did that affect you as you were learning more, about your own family?
Yeah, I mean, talk about intergenerational trauma. It's just never stops, and going as far back as when he was a kid and losing his mother. She had a stroke, and his father had died from mustard gas from exposure from mustard gas from World War I, and him going into World War II. He wasn't really very open about his military experience, and I can see how that affects him as an adult, and how he was a student of the Chicano movement, the Brown Pride movement. Really took a lot of plays from the playbook of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, and used the United Farm Worker movement to help forward the agenda that he had of protecting the Pascua-Yaqui tribe, which his wife was a member of, and keeping their land and keeping their traditions, which were a group of people that fled Mexico because they were at war with the Mexican government. And so there was just trauma upon trauma, and being able to record all that for the first time because for whatever reason, Voz de M.A.Y.O, the organization that he co-founded, which stands for the Voice of Mexican American Yaqui and Others, their political activism was never recognized by the history books that reflect Tucson's history, nor the Pascua-Yaqui tribe. So it was important for me to be able to build a case to show that this was a grassroots effort, and the tribe can't be this multi-billion-dollar casino industry that they are now, that really, I think, doesn't really serve their community by selling the school and selling the property that they fought for back to the city. So it just doesn't stop, and it's an interesting just dagger that's been left in this community. And you just imagine, when does the bleeding stop? I mean, and I hope that the book that was drawn by Gonzo and written by myself is able to provide some context of how strong and resilient and important this community is.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I think reminding people about, a community's activism and how strong and resilient they are, or trying to pull the metaphorical knife out, is one of the things that we hope to do with our art. I mean, it's a noble goal. Librarians have actually been talking more in recent years about, the things that comic books can accomplish, and about the benefits of them occupying a larger space in the realm of nonfiction and cultural history, and memoir. And even though La Voz de M.A.Y.O is the only book that we're featuring today that you could put in a nonfiction section, so many, or all of the titles that we're featuring, all of your books, are informed by and steeped in real history. Is that something that all of you set out to achieve from the very beginning when you started these projects? And were you hoping that your readers would take something specific away from reading your books?
I certainly did. I grew up in a colonial town, Annapolis, Maryland, and there was this weird relationship between Black history and American history. It was almost like they happened on separate planets, and I wanted to bring them together. And that was the point of John Adams, when people say, why John Adams and why all of the historical figures? Because it was almost like they existed in two different, like in the DC universe, on two different worlds. You had like a Black world, and then you had a world with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all those other guys. And so between that and to your last question, people have a tendency sometimes to think, well, to ask the question, what does slavery have to do with today? Mm-hmm. And through vampires who are timeless and immortal, I wanted to bridge slavery in that period of time to today, and to show that the effects of everything that's happened through time, through the perspective of someone who's seen it all. Mm-hmm. and seen the effects and is exploiting the effects of that period of time to today. And so I wanted history to be more of a user-friendly one as it applied to diversity. Mm-hmm. That it wasn't just like this thing that happened over there, that everyone was involved in the earlier period of time and today, and how the two connect.
Yeah, I think that the inclusion of Adams was a really interesting thing for me to read, because he is such a big character. And when you first see him, there's this moment where, at least I thought, this could be overwhelming to the other characters, or, this could decenter the other characters and their Blackness. And instead you turned it around and made him a commentary on the myth and the problems of the white savior and making it about yourself.
That's why I introduced him in the third book, more so than in the first, because I wanted you to get to know the world before you got to know Adams. Because if Adams was first, you'd say exactly that it was the John Adams book. But I wanted it to be more of a mystery, but more so to get the other characters on equal footing, so that when you finally got into the Adams story, that it wouldn't be any bigger than the other stories. And hopefully the readers were emotionally connected to the other characters and what they were going through as much as they would be to John and Abigail with what they were hoping to do.
It was really very successful.
Thank you.
David, I think I heard you chuckling at something that Rodney said earlier. Did you want to add anything?
Well, there are quite a few things actually, and one of them I haven't read issue 3 yet, so.
No!
It's okay. It's okay.
No, that's fine. I'm one of those people who likes to have the tension released beforehand. So
That's true about David.
For me, it's interesting because Sanford and Chuck had been developing Bitterroot before they brought me in on the team, and they both knew from the beginning they wanted it set in the Harlem Renaissance, which to me sounded really fascinating because I hadn't seen a lot of comics, especially set against that backdrop. But then there was also this part of me that was like, I don't want to do that because I'm like a research junkie, right? And it's, it really is my favorite form of procrastination. I was like, anytime from the 1950s onward, we could do, and I wouldn't even have to crack a book open, but with the Harlem Renaissance was really, it's been very challenging for me. And I know that, from Sanford's point of view, he's always, I need reference, I need this, I need that. And it's like, well, it's hard to find some of that reference. And Chuck is like most quote unquote normal writers in that he doesn't obsess with, okay, so which direction was Broadway, north of 135th Street in Harlem in 1924? What direction did it go in? And was the 3 train still running where, which is what I do. But I also think that for me, it was crucial to keep it in that era because what was going on specifically in Harlem during the Renaissance was this expression of creativity and this almost liberation, but it wasn't true liberation. There was creative liberation going on. But then conversely, everywhere else in the country, there was such abhorrent racism and lynchings were still going on and the Klan was very active. And there was such a dichotomy going on that I thought it would be really interesting to explore. Unfortunately, that dichotomy still exists. And so there's this relevance that honestly, I feel actually really uncomfortable with right now. And I did a panel earlier for SDCC Stay at Home. And we're talking about this a little bit, like, the last thing you want to do is write something, be a part of something that you turn on the news and you're like, oh, there it is, and that's sort of how it feels right now. But the thing I love about research and adding historical component to the comics that I work on is that hopefully it opens the door for other people. And that's why, like, in the back of every issue, we have these essays that John Jennings edits and curates that are tied to both the Renaissance, the era, and the people that were part of it, so that if you are an uber nerd like myself, and you want to know more about this particular thing, you can go there and you can read it.
I actually really appreciate how many of your books and how many books in general now do include back matter essays. It does seem like a lot of authors are now sort of cluing into what librarians and teachers have been asking for a while, and you guys have all been at the forefront of that, which is that, if you put back matter and ephemera and historical essays in the back of even a fiction book, that book can then more easily be used in a college or a high school level curriculum, or in library programming. For all of you, was that something that you were hoping your books would be utilized for when you got ready for publication? And if so, have you had any experiences that have really stuck with you with educators or librarians so far?
I mean, as far as Voz de M.A.Y.O, I'm very lucky that the New York Public, I know that someone at the New York Public school education that curates the curriculum has been very interested in Voz de M.A.Y.O, and the thought of my great grandfather being in a like Chicano Latinx footprint in history where kids will know, beyond me and beyond like my family's time, that people will know how important people like him are. Because when I like to ask a lot of Latinos and people that are into Latinx history, it's like, how do you build your Mount Rushmore? And we're always very limited with who we have. So but yeah, it was important to put newspaper articles and have a foreword written by Dr. Frederick Aldama, who's the co-founder of SoulCon, and who's been, I like to call, the Professor X of like Latinx creators. And he just like has a cerebral of just, he can like spot them wherever he is. And he's always been really, really such a champion of this type of work. And I have received word that La Voz is being implemented in a class at Cornell University. And I don't even have a college degree, and I don't have any business telling people how to learn or what to know. So it's been a journey.
That is wild.
Congrats.
That's so exciting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
college degrees are overrated, man.
They're
As
very
a college
expensive.
professor, I can tell you that.
I barely got out of high school alive, so I can
Same.
I can relate to that.
You hear that, kids? Save your money.
Yeah, waste of time.
Do you guys think that there is a difference in terms of how an audience receives or internalizes information about a subject when the source material is either primarily a comic book or bolstered by a comic book versus, say, a textbook or other media? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on comparison.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about this in that, and I've said this before. As a kid, I was not a particularly good student. Darcy said he barely got out of high school, and I was in the slow kid classes quite often.
Same.
And it had nothing to do with me not being smart. It had to do with me not being engaged, being bored. I was that kid who had the comic book inside the textbook and was reading it.
I was right there with you.
Yeah, and
We're all shaking our heads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I got older that I started, understanding about that there's different types of learning, and some people are more visual learners, and I still happen to be one. When I get in trouble for admitting this, but when I buy comic books, I usually buy them for the art first, right? Like if the art doesn't pull me in, then I won't even buy it. Now, the reading is what keeps me going on, right? It's like, I always compare it to going on a date. It's like, the art is the thing that makes you go, ooh, look at that. And then, but the reading is what really pulls you in. And so for me, as I venture more into nonfiction, I find myself, and I've heard this from teachers also and librarians, like my Frederick Douglass book is one of the only books about Frederick Douglass that has a lot of pictures and isn't like a 900-page block of text. And it's like, if that's the one thing that's stopping people from really learning about Frederick Douglass, then let's do this. Let's get going. I read the Classics Illustrated version of A Tale of Two Cities long before I read A Tale of Two Cities, the actual Dickens, book. But it was comics that introduced me to Dickens. It was comics that introduced me to Melville. It was comics that introduced me to Dumas. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Now, it's up to each of us individually to determine what we are going to do with this thing that comics gives us. But you know, I would rather have a kid reading, you know, a comic than watching a movie, I think, because just because they're at least reading, there's words there, they're using their brain. So I love it, I really do, and I think that where we are now within the medium, not the industry itself, but the medium is so exciting, and I'm seeing comics out there now that aren't quite comics, they're not quite graphic novels. I can't quite figure out what they are, but there's something different. So it's like an evolution. It's almost like when film went from silent films to talkies, and it was like everything started to change. I feel like we're on this major transitional path for this medium, and I'm just happy to be part of it.
It's
Yeah,
a really place to be. Go ahead.
I just want to follow up with Dave said. So I was dyslexic as well as several other learning disabilities, which I was completely unaware of until I was well into adulthood. But so what happened in school is I just couldn't keep up at the pace that was required, and therefore I just disengaged completely. And then that sunk further into this building this idea that I'm not smart, or I'm not as smart as the rest of people, you know, these kind of things. And so I think just because we are talking about, you know, we're connecting this as in terms of libraries and the role that they play. It's so important to include books like the ones we're discussing, and graphic novels that reach into historical fiction and nonfiction. Because if you're not, you're leaving out so many people who are just not able to access reading in the same way that you might. And I think that if particularly if you're a librarian, or you're someone who is in a role of stocking and cataloging, or, you know, for lack of a better term, you may not be dyslexic. It's probably not a role that dyslexic people go into. And so I think it's just it's important to just keep in mind that readership is diverse in all ways, including how we read, and to not leave to not leave readers out.
Yeah, it was similar. It was similar for me, you know, following up with what David said as well. I was that kid too who was bored really easily. And the classic illustrated books and Gold Key, when they would tell stories about history or historical figures, it didn't feel like medicine. It didn't feel like someone assigning me something. It was entertainment, but then I would sometimes hear a teacher mention something that I had just read in a graphic novel or a comic. And it was like, wow, okay. Thor was a real, like a god, you know, like a Norse god as well. And it created a bridge of getting information on my own, and I could sort of control it. And I can honestly say that between comics and independent study, it sort of helped create a bridge of information that I wasn't getting from school, or certainly public school. And I wouldn't be here without it. So, yeah.
And Henry?
Yeah, I mean, Voz de M.A.Y.O is a love letter to my, like, you know, junior high school year Henry, who was totally engaged in his studies because his teacher used mouse as a way to educate us on the Holocaust, and Persepolis, as also another assigned reading in high school. And I just want this book to reflect a community that I don't see in the comic book zeitgeist, Native Americans and Mexican Americans and Mexican migrants. And that's what this is what this square peg is trying to shove in this weird comic book industries like hole here.
It's okay. We brought a Dremel. So we're almost out of time, but in light of just how broad and meaty our discussion has been, and how limited our time unfortunately is in this panel and on this earth.
Thank you.
Stop, Summer. For readers who want to do a bit more of a deep dive into the themes that your books touch on, if you could all recommend either a book or books in any format, doesn't have to be a comic book, that you would recommend to your readers as a good companion piece.
Wow.
Now I got to remember the title of a book. I just got a book recently called "Making Our Way Home" by Imani Blair, which is one of those things that I'm talking about. It's not really a graphic novel, but it's more than an illustrated history book, and it's all about the Great Migration. It's all about the African American migration away from the South into the North and Western cities, and I'm endlessly fascinated with it because it's a topic that I've studied a lot, but it's the most accessible presentation of that subject. So yeah, Making Our Way Home by Imani Blair.
Thank you. Henry, do you have any?
Yeah, there is a there is a comic book anthology called the Latinx anthology that was curated by Frederick Aldama, who I mentioned earlier. A medley of Latinx people, Afro Latinx, Puerto Rican, Cuban, just so many different stories, just bite-sized, like windows into so many different points of view within this grand scheme of Latinx storytellers.
I'm reading a book right now called The Golden Spruce, which is a Canadian book, nonfiction about a tree, a golden tree, which was in Haida Gwaii, which is north of where I am in BC, and a logger that cut it down, and the tree was a big part of it was sacred to the Haida that lived there. And so it's really interesting. It takes you through the history of logging and interweaves the contentious relationship with Indigenous communities in that area, and it kind of jumps back and forth and explores the two different ideas. And The Golden Spruce, highly recommend it.
Yep.
Yes, for me, it's a book called Black by Kwanzaa Osa Gieffo. I know I messed that name up. But in dealing with, race and culture and oppression as it relates to power, I think it's a great companion to the idea of what we're trying to do with Killadelphia. And Bitterroot. I think, they're all sort of, they operate in a similar space, but I get something from all of them.
Thank you very much. And thank all of you, and thanks to our audience. I really appreciate our discussion, and honestly, I wish I could trap you here all day and just chat. Everyone have a lovely weekend. Take care of yourselves and be well, and we'll see you again soon.
Fantastic.
Same to you. Thank
you guys.
Thank
take
you.
it easy.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
I'd like to thank everyone for their time today, including the audience. We appreciate you taking the time to watch. We hope that you all are having a happy, healthy, safe summer. You can download library resources and free previews, as well as sign up for our library newsletter at the URL below. Questions can be addressed to the email below or via any of our social media accounts, including our website. Please check out other fun videos on our YouTube channel, and have a great day.